Right. Okay, I'm going to go next slide. So, good afternoon and welcome. No mai haere mai. Our session today is aimed at teachers in years 4 to 6 with ideas and thinking around teaching statistics. No blendi no ho for Te Moana Primary toku kura for Louise Graham toku ingoa. So my name is Louise Graham and I'm the lead teacher for mathematics at Te Moana Primary, the school in West Auckland. I've been teaching for 25 years at Te Moana, and I'm passionate about providing the best teaching and learning for our tamariki.
No Henderson aho, ko Edmonton Primary toku kura, ko Landis Cunningham toku ingoa. I am Landis. I'm a Year 5-6 teacher at Edmonton and the WSL for mathematics. I've been at Edmonton for 7 years and teaching for 19. I'm very passionate about mathematics and believe that all students can do maths.
Okay, next slide. Thank you. So our presentation today is a first for us, inspired by working with Dr. Pip Arnold on new refreshed teaching resources for Census at School. The resources have been designed to support teaching statistics in the new refreshed mathematics and statistics curriculum. And we've started with a focus on what is effective practice in teaching statistics and probability. There are many key elements to motivate, encourage, and provide for rich learning experiences. An effective starting point is the introduction of the use of data cards. They offer our tamariki opportunities for exploration, discussion, interest, and noticings, and also their own ways of displaying data. And I'm going to share a little bit more about the data cards that have been created by Pip later in the session. So another effective hook is to provide graphs of interest, such as animal tongue lengths, animal teeth, tail lengths, size of sharks, anything that generates student interest. And we want to encourage questions and ask them, what do they notice? What do they wonder? Does the data look correct? And a lot of this has been shared in the work of Dr. Jo Bowler, if you know her work, and she talks about asking the kids to really notice, really wonder about the data, asking them to become data detectives, really critically analyze the data. Does it make sense? Are there any anomalies? Is there anything that might be incorrect? And it encourages them to really critically think about the data that they've been shared. Another key component of teaching and learning in statistics is the use of the PBDAC cycle. This is problem, plan, data, analysis, conclusion, where tamariki learn to write and pose questions for investigation. This is modelled in the new Census at School resources. So the recommendation when using the PBDAC cycle is to actually go really deep, think about the best ways to display the data and analyse the data and decide as a group or class on a worthwhile conclusion. So that PBDAC cycle is really the essence of your teaching statistics. And if you haven't used it before, it is the best way of really teaching students to really think and to come up with worthwhile conclusions and outcomes. So next slide, please. Okay, so another really important part about teaching statistics and probability is actually the specific vocab in maths. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to understand and use the correct technical terms. And children need to be exposed to them a lot. You can't just use it once. It needs to be shared a lot. There's lots of good ways of teaching teaching vocab. One of the ways I've used is the tip chart, where you introduce a term You provide information, what does it mean? And then you draw a picture or something that's going to make sense for the learner. And what I found important with this is actually don't introduce lots and lots of terms all at the same time. So you might have a lesson and you might introduce maybe 3 or 4 terms at the most, and really delve into what they mean. Another useful way for learning vocab is using mix and match charts, creating the meaning, cutting them up, and children working with them so that they can really match them up. And I think a key is actually having the terms visible in the classroom. So when you learn a new word, it's got to be somewhere that the learners can access. You'd want it up in your room for, at least a month so that they really get to see the word, understand it. And then as lessons happen, you can refer to the word. You can come back, oh, there's the word up there. We've learned that meaning. Really understand what the word actually is that you're using. And regularly revisit. And I think Landis has got something to share that she uses in her class.
What I started doing was I actually have, they keep a maths book separate. They call it their maths dictionary. And at the start of each year, we actually build those terms. So as you do a new topic, you actually focus on those words, write those words down, have a good discussion. They keep their own dictionary, maths dictionary. The beginning of the year, we'll start with things like we talk about maths operations, what it actually means. Look at different words, because quite often they get used to using only one type of word, whereas for addition, you've got add, you've got addition, you've got plus, sum of, and we try and get the kids to actually understand all those words and to make them as part of their vocabulary. I have had students come back once they've left, because I encourage them to keep it as they go through their education with maths, not just for primary. And I've had a few kids come back and say they've kept it, and it's been a really worthwhile exercise. Because as they said, there are times they forget and they go, oh yes, we've got that and that, and they go back to the book and they actually do have a look. A classic one for me was working with some ESOL students, and we're doing some statistics, and we talked about the mean, and a student put their hand up and said, oh, does that mean that the word is actually nasty? And that brought home to me that English is such a varied language. It has so many meanings for one word. We really need to clarify all that for the kids and just help them understand that they can actually get through this and actually have a mechanism of getting through it. And we make the review of this vocabulary a daily occurrence, a little bit like our structured literacy, where we have the review. I started doing that, where we review the vocabulary and just keep going back to it to keep it going and alive in the classroom. And it just forms part of our daily mathematical language. Right, Louise.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is where Landis and I have been working, involved in creating and updating activities for year 4 to 6 with the Census At School activities. The refresh of the resources has been done to make them more current and relatable to our learners. So with the creation of the resources, we've also mapped out an overview for teaching statistics and probability. This will actually be shared a little bit later. A few more things to add to it. And the intention with these new activities is that statistics and probability will be woven throughout the year. They can be done as a standalone, but we're encouraging now for teachers to go deeper into the activities and to keep them alive by going through them later in the year. So possibly each term or maybe twice a year, so that you're not just visiting them once and that's the end of it for the year. So next slide. So all of the activities that have been refreshed are aimed at year 4, year 5, year 6, and some of them can really be done across year 4 to 6 or adapted. So you could use the year 4 activity, you might do it in year 5, but you might add to it. So next slide. So, thank you. So the first one that we've looked at is how many skips can we do in 30 seconds? So the recommendation here is for year 4, but as I said, it can be adapted. Next slide, Pip. And one of the things we're suggesting is that you can combine this with fitness. Now, if you know your learners, often when you say we're going to do fitness or we're going to go outside to do the maths, it generates a lot more excitement, a lot more enthusiasm. So you can really connect this activity with physical activity because it's how many skips can you do. The number of lessons, I know on the resource we've sort of said 1 to 2, but if you go really deep and things come up and you really want to take it further, you can go 3 or 4 lessons. I think you're really guided by what questions come up, you know, how much further you want to take it. Do you want to look at different ways of displaying graphs? Resources, really important that you need to get these to start with before you start your activity. And it goes through the PBDAC cycle. So it's the problem, plan, data, analysis. And all of this is actually online on the PowerPoint. So I'm going to go to next slide, Pip. So what's really important for doing the activity is that you need to sort of set it up well for your class. You need to decide who's going to be the recorder, how are you going to know when 30 seconds is finished. Then when you've got your data, how are you going to bring it back to the class? How are you going to display it? What's the best way of making a graph or making sense of it? It's making predictions before you even go outside. What do you think is going to happen? And then when they come back, you know, what did you notice? What surprised you about the number of skips people could do? Are there any other variables that might have come into play? Was the weather a factor? Was the time of year or the time of day a factor? Did boys do more skips or girls do more skips? Often at year 4, the boys are not very good at skipping. Does that come into play? I know not all boys, but often boys do not skip very well. So, you know, is that a factor? And then once you've got your data, you know, display it. Then what else do you want to know? So it's like going deeper, coming up with, you know, statements that make sense about the data that you've collected, looking at the different ways it can be displayed, really questioning what they found out. Is there anything else that they want to know about their data? Would they want to compare it to another class, another year level? And then thinking about, do they want to revisit each term? Do you want to do it again at the end of the year? What do you think might happen by the end of the year? Will they have more skips by the end of the year because they're older and they're faster and they're fitter? Now, at the bottom of that, the link is there. So if you want to go straight to that resource, well, the resources are on Census at School. Very easy to find, but if you also want to go straight to it, the link is there. So Landis is going to share.
That slide was fine, Pip. Next one's fine. The idea of this lesson is for students to investigate the number of hours they spend on screens. It's quite topical when you look at the news, how many hours our kids spend and should they be spending that many hours? How detrimental is it to them? So students will be required to make predictions prior to completing the investigation, because a lot of them don't have a very good sense of how many hours they do spend on there. They can then compare their results against those for the rest of New Zealand or just within the class. And this data, again, can be obtained from Census at Schools. Next slide, Pip, please. So this is recommended for year 5, but like a lot of the activities and the lesson plans, you can adapt these for your year level, for your students. While doing this, I actually had a chat to Louise and I said something that I did think about is combining it with Zespri Young and Healthy Virtual Adventures. I haven't actually done this, but it's something I will do when I do it again, is that part of Zespri is that they actually look at trying to build healthy habits in children. So they do look at things like how much water you drink a day, vegetables you eat, and one of the things they do look at is how much screen time do you actually have. So you could actually put the two, combine this lesson with that, and actually turn it into, I'd say, probably a year-long lesson, and look at all the areas. You co-construct the learning goals with the students so they know what they are working to achieve. Prior to starting this, you'd want to teach your children perhaps how to use things like Excel if they don't know, or Google Sheets. And there's also CodeApp, which is a free web-based app designed to support students in learning and doing data science. I'll talk a little bit more about that further on. Resources you'll need are recording sheets for the students to record their daily screen time, digital devices to develop the graphs if you're going to do it electronically, or you could just have some graph paper for them to actually do it with paper. The first step is to set the problem, which in this case would be how much screen time do we have or do we spend? But as part of the planning, you'll need to define what we mean by screen time, because there are so many variants that you could keep going for quite a considerable time, and trying to keep it as succinct, as quick as short as possible for the kids to keep their interest. How often do we collect the data? How do we record the time? If it is 1 hour and 15 minutes, do we record it, round it up to a half hour? Do we keep it at an hour and a quarter? All these decisions need to be made beforehand. Are we going to do 7 days a week, or are we only going to do certain days? Are we going to do just after school? So all those variants need to be discussed and decided prior to starting. As part of the analysis, you can talk about who has spent the most time on devices, why they did it, when they did it, what were they doing when they were on. Next slide, Pip. Once the data has been collected, explicitly teach and discuss with the students on how to display findings and reasons for displaying data in a particular way. They can then record their data using Excel as mentioned, and they can develop some graphs. They can use CodeApp to develop the graphs. If you haven't used it, please have a look at it. It is really, really great. It is a great tool. One of Dr. Pip Arnold's many gems that she's shared and introduced us to. The kids love it. The kids in my class have got onto it. It's very hard to get them off again. So I may have to set some ground rules. It has tutorials that you can work through, but it is a very intuitive app. Then you go on to making the observations, record those, and display all this information in the class. Perhaps discuss with students to come up with the next steps. Do it again in winter and do a comparison. School holidays, and you can compare that. So you can keep revisiting it all year. And what could they do to overcome any obstacles from getting off devices? I haven't shared the lesson plan because it's still in its raw state. It's ready for Pip to evaluate, to make necessary changes, and then to publish it on Census at School. All the resources and lesson plans ideas on Census are great, but they're just ideas that you can also adapt. If you have any suggestions or lesson plans, I would suggest you get hold of Pip. I know she's always looking to add to Census at School, so please, feel free to get hold of her and have a chat. That's me done.
The next slide. Thanks, Pip. Okay, the next one, this is what do Year 5 students like to do at lunchtime? And again, it's aimed at Year 5 students, but it can be adapted as well. The thing that I think is interesting about this one is there's actually Census at School historical data from 2005, and the Google slides are there. And there's a whole range of data that students like to do in 2005. So it's a great starting point. And you can sort of like initiate questions, make comparisons, and then sort of say to the students, what do you wonder? What do you think it's changed now? Start thinking about questions. What would you like to know now? What sort of things could we pose as a question? So the Google Slides is sort of like a great starting point to introduce the topic. you can have lots of different questions that could come up from it. So when you do this, it requires a lot of like questioning, posing questions. What do you want to find out? What are all the variables? Will it matter what week it is, whether it's summer, whether it's winter? Because children like to do different things in summertime compared to winter. At our school, in summer, they're all out on the field. In winter, they're probably all under the canopy. Is that going to make a difference? And you need to decide on questions that they're going to ask, how are they going to collect data. So there's a lot of planning before you actually start collecting data. So once you need to even decide on how are you going to collect your data, who are you going to ask? Are you going to ask all the Year 5 students, or are you just going to ask a class of Year 5 students? Once you've recorded the data, how are you going to analyze it and make sense of it? Oh yeah, next slide. So it's sort of, once you've collected the data, it's like sort of taking it back to the original question, thinking about their findings, writing descriptive statements. This often needs a lot of modelling. I often find students are not really good at making a full sentence. They'll often write 1 or 2 words. So it requires some deep thinking, deep teaching of how to make a statement that really makes sense about their findings. And then once they've done that, what did they notice? Would they take the data to another year level and compare to another year level? Do younger children like doing something different? Do they like doing the same thing? Do they spend more time doing something than others? The variables, you can have lots of different things that children like doing at lunchtime. One of the things you can do is you can have too many. So maybe when you're discussing it, you might agree on a set number so that students have to make a choice in the variables. And then you might want to revisit again later in the year, make comparisons. And then one of the things that I think is really important from all of this investigation and data is actually keeping it alive throughout the year. And that's something Landis and I have actually both agreed on. It's like often when we teach statistics, we often just do it like for one term or for part of a term. We often don't revisit it. So for me, learning from this would actually be to keep it alive, even if you do a couple of sessions each term, just so that you can review it, you can keep looking at what happened in the beginning of the term. What do you notice in the winter term compared to summer? What do you notice at the end of the year? So that it just keeps building on that knowledge and that questioning and what do you wonder, what do you notice as you've collected the data. So next slide. Okay. Right, so the data cards for year 4 to 6, these are on the Census at School website. I've used these data cards. They were an excellent way to start teaching statistics. I really liked using these because to introduce the students to the topic, it meant that they got the opportunity to just explore the cards themselves, to look at the data, really notice. Yeah, I don't know if you can see, but the data cards, they look like this. And I've made little packs for the learners to look at in groups. You give them a little bit of information. What I liked as well is that they're from the 2023 database. So when I introduced them, I was able to say, these are real children. This is the data that they have provided. It's not something just made up. And then you get them to start off themselves without a whole lot of teacher direction, that they can start making sense of it. And then as you go through, you can start introducing what did they notice, what are they seeing? And then you can sort of collectively agree on what things might mean. And then when you finish looking at them all, you can say there are 14 variables. And then you can share what does each variable mean. And I found I used them for year 5 and 6, and they were equally as good, and they noticed different things. So when you're in a different class or with different learners, they'll see different things. And once they've got the cards and they've started thinking about what everything means, then you can ask them what sort of questions would they want to know. How would they group the cards? And by giving them the opportunity to explore themselves, they have a chance to play with the cards, group them, decide on questions themselves. So as you sort of build up the knowledge and information, you can then come up with questions, and you can ask them, they can have different questions for their groups. And you might give some suggestions to get them started, especially if you go around groups, and some groups are like, not sure, what sort of question am I going to ask? You might group them into the year 4 cards, the year 5 and the year 6. If you notice the 6 on this card, that refers to year 6 children. So you might say, look, we'll just look at the data for year 6, especially if you're doing year 6 data. And next slide. And then once you've got, this is just some pictures of when I did the data in the class with some of my learners, and you can see they were totally absorbed in doing the task. They really enjoyed like discovering what was on the card, what did things mean. And then the next slide. So the data card, so once they've collected information, they started making headings and titles. They started making statements about the data, and then they were creating their own ways of displaying it. So they didn't all do a bar graph. They were sort of doing strip graphs, or they were doing, going across horizontal. And then they were able to sort of like look at each other's data, because some of them had chosen the same question. They were able to write descriptive statements. And then as a follow-up, now this activity was really, really cool, because the kids really enjoyed making their own data card. I've just put a little image on the screen there, but if you go to the website, there's pages where the children can create their own data card. And this actually really motivated them to create something themselves. And so then we could then just look at their data and compare it with each other in the class, referring to things like, you can see that's a blank, like what sort of hair color did boys have, girls have, was it long hair? So you could have lots of different variables. So they really enjoy doing that as a follow-up activity. Next slide.
No. Go back one.
Oh, back one.
Sorry, back one, please.
Back one. Oh, back one. Sorry, back. But
I just wanted to add to this that Pip did a lovely job with the Olympics on. I actually said to Pip, are there any Olympics data cards, Pip? And they weren't. And within a matter of next to no time, I got an email from Pip, said, here you are, there you go, there's some data cards for you. And they were really lovely. They're really useful, because my less able students, when they were doing their inquiry on a chosen Olympic athlete, they found those cards really helpful. And they used that information to create some statistical information about their chosen athletes. And it did create a little bit of conversation between those students, and they really enjoyed that. So data cards, really good. I would suggest you use them and have a good look at them. Sorry, Pip, next slide.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So as Marla pointed out, the new curriculums came out 2 days ago. So I've been looking at the new curriculum, and I worked out that all this information is all under the no. So if you've had a look at the new curriculum, the PBDAC cycle is taught in phases 1, 2, and 3, and you can see how important this is for teaching statistics. And if you looked at the teaching methods, it all points to this: posing investigative questions, supporting students to write their own. So it's really thinking about students, something that connects to them. I think that's the key of finding a context that is relevant to students, asking them to pose questions. What do they want to know? What do they want to find out? Writing their own questions, and then thinking about ways that they're going to investigate the question, and then thinking about ways they're going to display their data, and then how are they going to represent school-related issues. And then it's this asking evaluative questions about the sources of the information. And we haven't touched on this, but this ethical practices, and I think this is another important issue that we don't often think about. Is it ethical to share people's data? Do we need to get their consent? So I think that's something that we often don't think about when we're collecting data. And so thinking about the refresh curriculum, all of this relates to. So if you look at the Census at School website and you look at the different resources that are there, all of those can be used for the new refresh curriculum. You can choose one. You will know that you will be ticking off all of those things for our learners when they finish year 6. Yeah, I think that's, there's a lot more for the new curriculum, but they were the key things that stood out for me. So none of the things have changed in terms of the knowledge, but I think there's a lot more emphasis on the students writing questions, coming up with questions themselves, going deeper, analysing their findings, and then representing them, making conclusions, rather than just skimming across the data and just looking at graphs. Because I think often in statistics, we just look at the graphs and think we just need to teach the graphs. But I think it's a lot more than that now. I think it's a lot more using the PBDAC cycle to really go deeper for learners and really thinking about a conclusion and how that can relate to their lives. And we're going to finish today. Just a few quotes. We're trying to think of something about mathematics and in general. We just thought that, proposing a question has to be really important when you're doing something in maths, particularly statistics. It's about, thinking of the information. What do we want to know? What do we want to find out? What are the variables? How can we go deeper into this? How can we compare it? What are the factors that influence our decisions? Does it make sense? Will it look different later in the year when we look at it? Will it look different next year? And yeah, there should be no such thing as boring mathematics, especially in statistics. One of the things I think that I like about statistics is that I didn't actually share this, but with statistics, it can be taught across all levels in your class. It's very inclusive. You can actually teach a whole class, you can incorporate everyone, you can do groups. So it's a really inclusive topic, and all of the Census at School activities are very inclusive. They affect the lives of everyone. If you think screen time, everybody is on a screen at some point. Fitness, everyone loves to do fitness, I'm sure. And yeah, what do we do at lunchtime? Well, we're all doing things at lunchtime. So they really connect to their lives. So with statistics, if you want to get all your levels, include all your learners, look for a good way to hooking them into mathematics. It's a great site to look at. So I think that's us. So if there's any questions, we're